Welcome back to Simplifying the State. I'm Adam Watson.
I'm Nicholas Parham.
On today's episode, we have a couple topics we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about the VP debate between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz, which took place on Tuesday night. We're going to be talking about the highly contested, at least now it is, Nebraska Senate race. We're going to be talking about the U.S. court unsealing January 6 documents, and then we're going to be talking about the current situation in the Middle East. Okay, so, overall, this was if you had to compare the two debates, this was the more boring of the two, I felt. There was definitely a lot less noteworthy clips and a lot less of significance, but there were two that I thought really stood out, so we're going to play that for you now. The first one is J.D. Vance, the subject of January 6th was brought up. Tim Walz asked J.D. Vance if Donald Trump lost the election, and then this is how he responded.
Lose the 2020 election.
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
Okay, so as you heard, he kind of dodged the question on whether he lost the election, partly because Donald Trump has still claimed that he won the 2020 election. Nicholas, do you think that the statement will have any real impact, or is it just another thing that got lost in the noise?
I mean, overall, Vance played this very well. A lot of the more serious questions that were brought up, Vance managed to slip by and get away with not answering them directly. I don't think this will have, this debate as a whole will have a huge impact on the election. Maybe it would go in the Republicans' favor a bit more because of the kind of watering down, well, not watering down, but saning of sort of MAGA and Trumpism to the people of the United States.
Right, making it more palatable to the more centrist Republicans. So the second clip that I thought was the most interesting was from Tim Walz. So the moderators asked him about a statement which he made, which was that he was in China during the Tiananmen Square protests. A couple newspapers in Nebraska showed that he was actually in Nebraska when that happened. I mean, he did go to China that year to help teach in some schools in rural China. But here he is responding to that.
See. All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests, went in.
Okay, so, that could become an issue, him saying that he was in China during the Tiananmen Square protests when he wasn't. Although, I think that probably just chalks it up to a guy who probably misspoke and who told a story wrong a couple times and just got it stuck in his head that much. What do you think?
I mean, yeah, it seems to be like an honest mistake, and although Walz did fumble on it a little bit, he did manage to say at the end that I'm a knucklehead sometimes, I just slipped up.
Right. So I think when it comes to who actually won the debate, I think there are a couple ways you could determine who won the debate. I think if you look simply on debate performance, like who was the best at debating, I think it's probably going to be J.D. Vance, because he has had far more experience debating. He was more educated on debating. He has more experience doing it. So I think if you look simply at that, J.D. Vance probably won the debate when it comes to just sheer debating skill. Although when it comes to the actual whole debate, I think when it comes to likability and like who came across as more, again, likable, I think it probably went in Walz's favor as he came away with a much higher favorability rating. But when it comes to the actual polls of who won the debate, there is not a clear winner, and most people agree that it was a tie. So what do you think, Nicholas?
Well, yeah, like you said, most people believe it was a tie, and so therefore it wouldn't have a huge impact on the election, and that Vance managed to play it very well, though Walz managed to walk away with high likability. So wins on both sides. However, it is important to note that Vance did lie about a lot of things, and managed to get away with him with his experience with debating. So that
Right.
could be a thing to look out for in the future, I guess.
Right. It felt kind of like he was setting up his own possible run in 2028 for the Republican nominee. I mean, he's certainly a very ambitious person, and I think that this was, possibly him setting up the stage for a future run for president. I mean, he definitely made the more extreme elements of MAGA sound more palatable to the kind of center of the ideology. I mean, before he became part of the Trumpism movement, part of the MAGA movement, he was a center left, center right person. I mean, from the interviews he gave, and so he has a lot of experience when it comes to kind of talking to those people, talking about the issues that they care about. And so I think he definitely made, like I said, more extreme elements of MAGA that a lot of Americans don't particularly like. He made it sound more palatable to the center group. So real quick, let's look at favorability ratings post and pre-debate. So before going into the debate, according to a CNN poll, JD Vance had a negative 22% approval rating. Post debate, he had a negative 3, so overall he improved about 19 points. Walz had a plus 14% approval rating. Afterwards, he had a plus 37, so he had a change of about 23 points. So, I mean, it seems like although JD Vance made up a lot of ground, Tim Walz overall had the better night when it comes to gaining approval, and I mean, he's now still very far ahead of Vance when it comes to approval. I think there was a interview with a bunch of undecided voters that was conducted, and out of from the actual debate night, it was, I think, one who actually came away saying, "I'm going to vote for Kamala Harris now after seeing the debate." So I think that now this was probably not a big deciding factor on the election. Like we've said before, debates are mostly just political entertainment and not actually going to move the needle on anything when it comes to who they'll vote for. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the Nebraska Senate race. So Nebraska is typically a very red state when it comes to who they elect. They went to Trump in 2020. They have a Republican senator right now. But recently, there has been some very interesting polling coming out of Nebraska. So the challenger to the Republican is named Dan Osborne. Now, he is not a Democrat. He is unaffiliated and running as an independent. So the Republican's name is Fisher. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And she has been their senator for the last term, so she is the current incumbent. Now, Dan Osborne, he is at about 39.9% in the 538 average. The Republican is only at 42.6, so there's a difference of 2.6%. So that means that this is definitely a race that could a Senate seat that could be flipped away from the Republicans, not necessarily to the Democrats, but based on his stances on various things, he is likely to caucus with the Democrats and be a kind of Joe Manchin type senator. I mean, he's definitely a centrist. He's former Navy. He's a former union worker. So, I mean, this could be someone who would caucus with the Democrats and who could possibly help give them a majority if the Senate, if that seat were to be flipped. That comes off the Cook Political Report downgrading the race in Texas. from a likely to leans Republican, which is the closest thing to toss up. So Texas, I think, is probably definitely in play now, and I think this just gives the Democrats more opportunities to either maintain their majority or possibly even pick up a seat and not only have a tie, but possibly maintain their majority of 51, maybe even 52 if they can pick up uh, Texas, Florida, and get the Nebraska seat. What do you think?
I mean, yeah, the current happenings in polling in Nebraska is pretty unexpected, I would say, and if I think an independent running in a typically red state that is unaffiliated with the Democrats is more appealing to those swing voters that aren't usually for a certain party indefinitely. So an independent could, even if they are leaning one way or another, could look like a fresh apple, if you would.
Right, right. I mean, I think there definitely is an issue for people who identify as Republican to vote for a Democrat in a state like Nebraska. And so I think that if the candidate is unaffiliated, then that makes possibly voting against a Republican much easier. Okay, so moving on, we're going to be talking about how a U.S. court unsealed January documents relating to January 6th, the case against Trump when it comes to January 6th. So there were several things in the document. It was unsealed by Judge Chutkin in federal court. So there were a couple quotes from that. There was a lot of information. But the most interesting thing I thought from this was this part. So when he was told by an aide that he being former President Trump, when he was told by an aide that Vice President Mike Pence was in peril as the rioting at the Capitol escalated, President Trump replied, and this was from a quote from a person who was under oath. He replied, "So what?" When one of his lawyers told him that the false claims that the election had been marred by widespread fraud would not hold up in court, former President Trump responded, quote, "The details don't matter," unquote. So, I mean, I think overall, this was always going to be the case when it came to the actual case itself in court, but I think now this possibly hurts him in the court of public opinion. What do you think?
I mean, official documentation like this can be pretty damning, especially in, like, famously in cases of Nixon, for example. However, for something like this, and how Trump and his campaign team has managed to brush off accusations of January 6th before, I feel that it's a possibility that it'll just happen again.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, this is definitely something that will be interesting to see because I mean, if he loses the election, he will not have the ability to use presidential immunity, and so this could possibly go to trial, of which would probably, just based on the evidence and such, possibly not go well for him. Okay, we're going to move on now to the final topic, which is the situation in the Middle East. So, since our last episode, there has been a significant increase in tensions in the Middle East. So, it all started. It all started with, well, at least this part of it started with Israel assassinating the head of Hezbollah, which is a militant organization within Lebanon. This followed a bunch of strikes in Lebanon by Israel. Now Israel has invaded. Well, they said they are conducting raids, small raids within southern Lebanon. Shortly after that, Iran launched almost 200 ballistic missiles at Israel. Israel's recently Israel strikes have killed about 37 people in Lebanon in the last 37 hours, this says. It's not specified whether those are Hezbollah militants or civilians. Um, they've been recently striking Beirut, which is the capital of Lebanon. So I mean, it seems as though the U.S. strategy of trying to avoid a wider war in the Middle East has essentially, I'd say, failed by this point, because there has definitely been an increase in hostilities even in the last week, and so I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, the U.S. hopes for a not wider conflict in the Middle East has, I think we're seeing the beginning stages of a wider war similar to that of like the 6 Day or Yom Kippur War, where Israel's fighting everyone around it. I think that the raids they're saying they're operating is essentially just a ground invasion leading to an occupation of Lebanon's south of that river. So
I do think it could see Iran's proxies like the Houthis in Yemen step up attacks on Israel. Um, I mean, the ballistic missile strike was also payback for Israel assassinating the political leader of Hamas within Iran, in addition to the ground invasion of southern Lebanon. So I think there was a dual motive behind that. Israel has said that they will respond to this, but they have not specified on how or when they will do so. So I mean, this is definitely going to be a very quick moving issue and a very possibly rapidly escalating one, which I think will be interesting to watch in the next couple of days and weeks. Okay, that's it. That's all for today's episode. Thanks for tuning in to Simplifying the State. We'll be back next week with a new episode, so tune in then.